What's up everybody, Dan here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Thrustmaster T818 Ferrari SF1000 direct drive bundle. This is the top of the line offering from Thrustmaster and it has some really great features as well as some things that I think can be improved, and I'm going to discuss all of that stuff here in this review. But before we get any further, I need to give you the disclaimer that Thrustmaster did send me these items out for free to review, but as always, they've had no input on anything you see or hear in this video. All views and opinions are my own. They didn't pay me any money for this review, and they will not see it before you guys do. So here's a quick rundown of how we'll go through this review. First, we'll hit a quick overview of the product as a whole, then we'll discuss the components individually, then I'll go through some pros and cons, and then last, we'll take a look at the package as a whole and I'll give you my final thoughts. So what are we actually looking at here? Well, this package combines Thrustmaster's first attempt at a direct drive wheelbase with a one-to-one replica of the real-world steering wheel found in the Ferrari SF1000 Formula One race car. It's even complete with the same 4.3-inch display found in its real-world counterpart. There's no doubt this kit is a head turner and it will look absolutely killer on your rig, but it's going to cost you big and you really need to be a die-hard fan of Ferrari to appreciate the bundle to its full extent. It comes in priced at $1,099 US and it's plastered with Ferrari logos and red paint all over its exterior panels. So you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it, but either way, if you want one, you'll have to drop a pile of cash to get your hands on one. Now let's actually dive into the T818 wheelbase itself. Thrustmaster claims this has a constant holding torque of 10 Newton meters. Now I don't have a scientific way to measure this, but based on my experience with other wheelbases, I feel like they've actually underrated this number. It honestly feels like more than that to me, and in fact it feels pretty similar to my old AccuForce V2, and that was a pretty strong wheelbase. As I said earlier, this is Thrustmaster's first attempt at a direct drive wheelbase, and honestly, it does show. They've certainly done a lot of things right here, but they've also missed the mark on a few things as well. Let's first talk about the force feedback quality, because honestly, they have done a phenomenal job here. This is some of the most sharp and direct force feedback I've ever felt right out of the box. Now, other wheelbases can feel as sharp and in fact even better with a ton of dialing into the settings, but this is extremely sharp and, dare I say, almost perfect right out of the box. There's certainly an argument for having a ton of sliders inside a wheelbase's software so you can tweak it to your heart's content. That typically leads to an initial learning curve and a force feedback that doesn't feel that great at its default settings. Thrustmaster didn't go that route here. They've actually dialed in the force feedback extremely well at its default settings, and at the same time they've offered very few sliders and adjustments for tweaking those values. This in my opinion is fantastic for a first-time direct drive user because they've kept it very simple and you still get really good force feedback. Now I can totally see where a seasoned direct drive user may not be a fan of this approach, but again it's fantastic for a first-time user. In the software, there's a slider for overall strength, damper, and linearity. That's it. There's nothing else. And in reality, you'll want to keep the linearity at its default setting, so there's really, in theory, only 2 sliders to adjust at all. You can't get much more simple than that. They also offer 4 different baseline modes to choose from. Each mode gets progressively stronger and more intense as you make your way up the list. I personally found Sport to be the best for me, but you'll want to play around with this list and see which one is going to fit your driving style the best. Now let's move over to where I feel like they've missed the mark here on a few things. So Thrustmaster has priced this as a premium wheelbase, and while the force feedback is fantastic, the choice of materials used here are not really up to par with what I would consider a premium item. There is a lot of plastic used on this wheelbase, and unfortunately it gives it a very toy-like look and feel up close. Also, Thrustmaster, in my opinion, puts far too much emphasis on the artistic design of their wheelbases. They've done this for almost all of them in the recent wheelbases they've had released, and it's the same story here with the T818. I really wish they would just focus on what's needed to make the wheelbase functional and nothing extra, but unfortunately, because of this continued design trend they've been using, The T818 base is massive, and there's really no need for it to be that big. Outside, they just wanted it to kind of look cool and have a specific design element to it, but I really think it's unnecessary. If Thrustmaster ever considers taking one piece of advice from me, I really would hope that it would be this. Make all of your future wheelbases or products in general about function first and leave this artistic approach in the past. In my opinion, it is a waste of resources. Another similar story here is the LED strip on the front of the base. For one thing, you're not going to see it with certain wheels, and when you do see it, it's just distracting, at least in my opinion. Sure, I suppose to some people it might look cool, but in reality it's completely unnecessary. Again, this is in my opinion. Get rid of it and use that portion of the budget to include some nicer materials on the outside of the base next time. Get rid of the lights, get rid of some of the plastic, and add in some finer materials like metals, because honestly, a lot of wheelbases priced similarly have much nicer materials in general. And the last thing I'll mention is the odd bolt pattern they've used on the bottom for mounting. Again here, I think it's because of this artistic approach. The bottom of the base is more narrow than its competitors, so it can't use that same standard bolt pattern that all of the others use for mounting it to a sim rig or a wheel stand. And so because of this, you're actually forced to purchase an additional mounting bracket just to mount it to your rig, and I genuinely don't understand the thought process behind some of these decisions like that. With all that said though, the quality of the force feedback is so good that I can honestly overlook many of these other shortcomings. After all, the most important aspect of a wheelbase is the quality of its force feedback, and Thrustmaster has genuinely knocked it out of the park with the T818 wheelbase. Now let's move from the wheelbase and go to the connection point between the wheelbase and the steering wheel and talk about their new quick release system that they've designed specifically for the T818. This has been a big topic of discussion dealing with this base. There have been many reports of this QR system having excessive play and flex, but I'm happy to report, at least for the one that I have, it's very minimal and basically non-existent. In fact, when I try to force it to flex, it's the SF1000 steering wheel that flexes most, and not actually the quick release itself. Of course, we have to keep in mind that we're dealing with a steering wheel that's made of plastic, a wheelbase that's made of plastic, and a quick release that's also primarily made out of plastic. So like it or not, there is always going to be some flex simply due to the materials it's made out of. But at least in my case, it's not actually coming from just the quick release connection point. It's more a combination of the plastic components as a whole, and I honestly don't notice it at all when I'm racing. This is a very similar story to a lot of other wheelbases as well, so it's not just this story with the T818. Now, outside of these potential issues, I found the QR to be just fine. It's certainly a different take on the quick releases compared to other companies, but so far in my experience, it's been fine and I don't really have any complaints. Now we're going to dive into the SF1000 steering wheel. Like the wheelbase it's attached to, it's a mixed bag here as well. It's got some really nice premium features, but at the same time, the build materials leave a lot to be desired. This is a common thing found with Thrustmaster products in general, unfortunately. If you're familiar with the automotive world, you'll probably have heard the phrase, "that car is a nice 15-footer." If you're not familiar with that, it's referring to a car that has a decent enough paint job that it looks great from 15 feet away, but as you get closer, you start to notice its imperfections. That's the story we have here with the SF1000. From across the room, it looks like the nicest and most expensive steering wheel you've probably ever had on your rig. But as you sit down and start to take a drive, you realize how much they've cheaped out on the build materials. Just like the wheelbase, they've used a ton of cheap feeling plastics, and I just don't understand these design choices. I get it, it's to save money, but I personally think there were better places they could save money and have a little bit better steering wheel in the bundle as a whole. The steering wheel itself, the buttons, and pretty much everything outside of a few components are made of plastic. And that's all good until you mount it to a wheelbase that's capable of producing a lot of torque like the T818 can. you instantly feel the downsides of using materials like plastics as soon as you start to drive. There's no way to sugarcoat the fact that it bends and flexes under heavy loads. Again, I believe this is most of the flex that people are actually seeing that they're blaming on the quick release. It also amounts to a somewhat noisy experience as the plastic creaks and crunches during hard use. Is it bad enough to be a deal breaker though? No, not really, but it's not something I'd expect to have to deal with for a product at this price point. Again, it's over $1,000. It's not that I'm surprised though, as I'm sure most of the steering wheel's budget went towards the Ferrari license, but it does beg the question though, would it have been a better choice to design a generic F1 style wheel if that's what they were going for, and put that saved licensing money towards better quality materials? Well, I guess that really depends on how much of a Ferrari fan you actually are. Well, that's going to sum up all the negative stuff here for the SF1000, and it's honestly really just pretty much rainbows and sunshine from here on out. They've actually done a really great job making sure at least the touch points feel good and are also durable at the same time. The hand grips are made of that industrial style rubber material, and they're actually very comfortable to hold on to and offer a ton of grip, but they also feel like they're going to last for an extremely long time. The magnetic shifters are one of the few components that are actually made out of metal on this entire combo, and they do really have a satisfying click in use. The dual paddles that sit below those shifters, they feel a little bit spongy, but they are still made out of metal and they work just fine. On the front, there's a ton of mappable buttons, switches, and rotary dials, and you seriously should have no problems mapping everything you need and more. Now, there are two dials in the center of the wheel that are not mappable, and that's because they actually control the digital screen on the face of the wheel. And in my opinion, this screen is the #1 standout feature of the SF1000 by far, and probably of this whole bundle. It has a bunch of different layouts, with each one showing various combinations of telemetry data as well as other pertinent racing information. And they're also customizable to an extent to further dial in whatever your specific needs would be. And the screen itself just looks really nice and really premium. And I'd say that that's the best standout feature, is just the way it looks massive on the center of this wheel. But you want to keep in mind that unfortunately the display is not compatible with all games at this time, but it does work well with most modern mainstream sim racing titles, especially on PC. But you'll want to refer to the list of supported titles on Thrustmaster's own website, as it's updated regularly as new supported titles are added. Now we're going to jump into some pros and cons. I'm going to start with the pros. The first pro is that it has excellent quality force feedback and strength. It is probably some of the best in this price range, and arguably maybe even better than some more expensive wheelbases that I've used. Next pro is it does not require a lot of setup for the force feedback to feel great, and that is a huge point. The next pro is that it is part of Thrustmaster's extensive and very proven ecosystem that has many great steering wheels and pedal sets, shifters, and all kind of stuff that you can pair with this combo. And the last big pro that I'll mention here is that the SF1000 steering wheel is a one-to-one replica of the real thing found in the race car of the same name, right down to the customizable center digital screen. Now let's hit on a few cons. The first con is that it is quite expensive. Next con is that you'll need to purchase and pay for an additional adapter just to use standard mounting holes on a sim rig or a wheel stand. There is a lot of plastic, and it's too much in my opinion. It's on the wheelbase, the steering wheel, and the quick release system. They've gone for an artistic design approach rather than focusing on form and function, which I personally think is more important and the better route to go. The paddles have to be removed on the SF1000 to access the USB port to upgrade the firmware, which is kind of a pain in the butt. All right, now I want to quickly touch on a few neutral points here. They're not good, they're not bad, they're just things I want to mention that are going to be very specific to your actual situation. So the first neutral point is that it is Ferrari branded, and not everyone is a Ferrari fan, so you may or may not like that from a visual standpoint. Also consider, if you are not a Ferrari fan and you buy this, you are paying a premium for that Ferrari logo that you may not even like, so you may be better off purchasing something else. And the next neutral point is there have been reports of excessive flex in the quick release system as a whole. Fortunately, I haven't had this issue, and I have expressed why I think those were issues previously in this review. But just be aware that there have been quite a few users that have reported this in the past, so just be aware of that. All right, and now I'm going to move on to my final thoughts. So there's no doubt in my mind that this is a fantastic package at its core and an excellent first attempt for Thrustmaster in the direct drive space. It's a strong and precise direct drive wheelbase built by a proven manufacturer in the sim racing space, and I certainly have enjoyed using it on my own personal rig. My favorite characteristics are the ease of setup and the phenomenal force feedback it offers by far. I've also had no problems or potential concerns during my time with it at all. I do, however, question some of Thrustmaster's choices with their design approach, which I believe has put it at a price point higher than it really needed to be. For example, was it worth the additional cost passed down to the customer for the Ferrari license? My guess is only if you are an absolute die-hard Ferrari fan, but are there that many people out there? Possibly, but I'm not really sure if it's enough to justify that choice as a whole. Also, as I've already stated a few times, I believe they put too much emphasis on the artistic design instead of just concentrating on form and function. If they had kept it more simple, could they have produced it a little cheaper? Or even at the same cost, would a more simple design have allowed for use of better build materials instead of all this plastic? My gut tells me yes. But look, I'm only one person out of many, and I'm sure there are many people out there who like LED lights, Ferrari logos, and aren't a fan of the basic box design that many other direct drive manufacturers use. And for those people, you honestly can't get much better than this at this point in time. For Thrustmaster's first attempt, I'd say this is pretty darn good, and I imagine with a little tweaking, their next one will be even better. Now, for the question of the hour, should you buy one? Well, if you like great force feedback, easy setup, and you also love Ferrari, then this might just be the best package for you. For everyone else though, you might want to wait for their next one or consider options from other manufacturers. Well, this has been my review of the Thrustmaster T818 Ferrari SF1000 bundle. I really hope that this was helpful in your search for your next sim racing wheel. And if it was, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. As always, guys, thank you so much for checking out my videos, and I really hope to see you in the next one. We'll see you later.